Okay, I think I'm wired in. Thank you, Pastor Micah, and I know Pastor Terry is not here, but certainly appreciate giving us the opportunity to share with you about Compassion Canada. And it's been a while since I've been in this church. I have attended here on a few different occasions years back, I believe when Pastor Moore was here, so that puts me back a little bit, doesn't it? And I see some familiar faces here this morning, some colleagues that I worked with MB Power. A fellow gospel heirs here, I think Ron McLeod, was talking to him, and my wife and I were part of the gospel heirs ministry, I think through the 90s, all through the 90s, and I believe we sang at this church. Is that true? And sometimes when you're in a group like that, you're in many churches and you forget, was I there or was I not? But I believe we were here, and so it's great to be back with you this morning. You have a beautiful sanctuary, by the way. And so it's certainly a privilege to speak to you this morning. Luciano has already been introduced, and in a few moments, well, maybe a little more than a few moments, but he's going to come up and play a piece on the piano for us. He's a gifted musician, pianist, and so you're going to really enjoy that. And then we're going to just kind of sit here in these stools together. And I'm just going to interview him a little bit, and he's going to share about his involvement with Compassion and also his story, which I think you'll find very fascinating and very amazing, really, what God has done in his life. And I'm glad to have Marty with me. She's the one that looks after the table. You know how men sometimes we're not good at all the details. So if you have some real serious questions to ask, she's the one to ask. And we'll be at the table at the end of the service. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. So as we said, Luciano attends the college, and he was a Compassion child in the program for 17 years. So it's kind of nice to be here. I can share things about Compassion, but it's nice to have someone here who actually was part of Compassion ministry, a child in that program. So if I say something that's not right, he'll probably correct me a little later on. You'll get the true story, but hopefully everything is going to be up to par with what Luciano will tell you. First of all, let me ask you: is there anyone here who now sponsors a Compassion child? I think there are. Oh wow, yeah, that's super. Yeah, would love to talk to you as well at the end of the service and tell us a little of your story about your involvement there. That's great. A few years back, Marty and I began the Compassion journey by sponsoring two beautiful children, a young girl named Stephanie from the Dominican Republic and a boy named John who lives in Peru. And several years ago, we had the awesome privilege of visiting Stephanie while on a Compassion-sponsored trip to the Dominican. And really, time does not allow me to go into details of that trip this morning, but it truly was a life-changing experience. And not only did we get to spend time with Stephanie and her mother and show her some things in the city of Santo Domingo that she'd never seen before. She'd never been to the city. We had some gifts for her. We had pizza, which she'd never had before. All those little things that we had a chance to experience with her. And not only was that a wonderful experience, but we had an opportunity to visit several of the Compassion centers in Santo Domingo. And Santo Domingo is a city of 5 million people, and the majority of those people live in poverty. And so we visited those centers. We saw these kids gathering together, playing together, worshiping together. It truly is amazing the work that Compassion does in these countries. And the interesting thing is, too, it's all run by Dominicans. Okay, there are not a lot of Canadians and Americans there looking after this thing. It's all run by Dominicans, the local people. And so to see all of that and to see the integrity that's there and all that God is doing through these local churches that they're associated with. I believe there are over 60,000 children Dominican that are now part of the Compassion ministry. And so it continues to grow, and God is opening up more doors continually. I have to say, sponsoring these two precious children continues to be one of the greatest investments we have ever made with the resources God has entrusted to us. And I can't express to you in words the joy in knowing that these two beautiful children, along with nearly 2 million others around the world are being cared for by people who love them and tell them on a daily basis, you are special in God's sight, and yes, your dreams can come true. Through nearly 7,000 local churches in 26 countries, Compassion seeks to develop children in all aspects of their lives, their minds, bodies, relationships, and all of this while discovering God's love for them in the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is the heart of Compassion's ministry, not only to do good works in providing food, education, health care, not only to do that, but to make passionate disciples of Jesus Christ. This is the heart of Compassion's ministry, not only to do goods. And I think that's important to get, not only to do good works, but to make passionate disciples of Jesus Christ. And I can tell you this morning, it works. Nearly 85% of children sponsored through Compassion become Christians. Now that's an amazing statistic, isn't it? 85%. And really that's why I'm so passionate about the work of Compassion today, because it's more than just providing immediate needs. It's dealing with this issue of a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. It really makes the difference in their lives. Speaking of statistics, did you know that there are nearly 400 million children living in poverty? That was amazing to me when I thought about it. 400 million children living in poverty today. So how do we as Christ followers respond to this need around the world? Or is it even our responsibility? I struggled with that myself for a number of years. We've been part of Compassion for 4 or 5 years now. And I sat through different presentations over the years. And I would sit there and think, well, yeah, I give to this. I support a missionary here, and I'm giving a lot to our local church, and someone else can do this. And it wasn't until one particular presentation, and Marty and I were both in that service. She was playing, I guess, for the music that morning. And we both felt at the end of the service that this is what we need to do. And it took me a while to realize that it is part of my responsibility as a Christ follower. There are many scriptures in the Bible that speak about the poor, in which God commands us to care for them in their distress. Proverbs 31:8-9 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. For the rights of all who are destitute, speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." And then in Hebrews 13:16, "And do not forget to do good and to share with others. But with such sacrifices, God is pleased." And in Zechariah 7:8-10, we're told, "And the word of the Lord came again to Zechariah. This is what the Lord Almighty says, administer true justice. Show mercy and compassion to one another. Do not oppress the widow or the fatherless, the alien and or the poor." From reading these scriptures, it's very clear, at least to me, that caring for the poor is an important part of the Christian life and certainly reflects the heart and the life of Jesus. We find in Scripture that Jesus especially cared for the children. In Mark 10, Jesus says to his disciples, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." So what are the various elements involved in poverty, in caring for those who are poor? First of all, we know it's crucial to look after their immediate needs, such as food, clothing, health care, which really are the essential elements in sustaining life. I don't know about you, but I often become overwhelmed when I think of poverty. It's easy to give up and say there's really nothing I can do that will make a difference. Nothing ever changes. Have you ever felt that way? What do we do with this? It's so big. It seems to be getting bigger. My little contribution is not going to make much difference. Well, here's a fact that will hopefully encourage you to take action. Between 2000 and 2015, the number of people living in poverty was cut in half. Another staggering statistic to me. That means over 1 billion people were lifted out of extreme poverty. That is an amazing thing, isn't it? And it's all because of programs and operations like Compassion. And there's a lot of other groups and organizations that do this kind of work and other work that has brought this statistic to where it is today. As I personally struggled with poverty and what my role should be, my thoughts were drawn to Matthew chapter 14, where Jesus feeds the 5,000, which, by the way, is recorded in all 4 Gospels in the New Testament. And I'm going to read the account found in Matthew chapter 14. When Jesus heard that John the Baptist had been beheaded, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." And Jesus replied, "They do not need to go. You give them something to eat." "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000, besides women and children. Well, I believe Jesus used this story to help change the way we think about underwhelming resources in the face of overwhelming challenges. So when you look at this account, there were over 5,000 people here. There were no restaurants, of course, in the area. The disciples wanted to send them away. Let's just let them go into the village and see if they can find food. But Jesus didn't think that way, did he? He saw an opportunity. And let's feed them. We can feed them. And it seemed like that whole resource thing was just overwhelming for the disciples. You see, the disciples saw only a large problem, as we can see in poverty. It's a large problem. But Jesus looked at the exact same situation, and what did he see? He saw a tremendous opportunity. We have all these people here. Let's feed them. Let's look after their needs. When we see poverty and sickness, hunger and famine, cruelty and abuse, do we see them as problems? Or do we, like Jesus, filled with compassion, see their human faces and begin to respond as a shepherd to his sheep? You see, Jesus did not ask the disciples to do the impossible. He asked only that they bring him what they had. And all they had was what? 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And Jesus took those 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And what did he do? He fed the multitude, performed a miracle with that, multiplied that in an incredible way. Richard Stearns wrote this statement in his book, The Hole in Our Gospel. God never asks us to give what we do not have, but he cannot use what we will not give. Let me say that again. God never asked us to give what we do not have, but he cannot use what we will not give. And there's some amazing stories about how individuals and even businesses have come up with some creative ideas on how they can give to help the needy and the poor around this world. And compassion is one of them. And it's an interesting story I just heard the other day of a church outside of Toronto. It's just a very poor area outside of Toronto. And the people are pretty much destitute. But there's a group of them that gather together. And somehow they came across information regarding compassion, the work of compassion. And so this little group decided, well, boy, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could sponsor a child? But yet none of them really had jobs. They were just very destitute. And they decided they're just going to take up an offering. So they passed this bucket around, and they put in their loonies and toonies and quarters, and they raised enough money to sponsor a child for the first month. And they did this every month, and today they are sponsoring a child by just collecting that small amount of money to do it. And so, you know, God, if we're willing to open up to that and allow God to use what He's given us, then that can be multiplied in many ways. Another interesting story, and a good friend of mine owns a car dealership in Moncton. And he was wondering, well, how can I, as a business, how can I contribute to helping the poor and the needy? And he heard a presentation from Compassion a number of years ago. And so what he does now, he sells used cars, very successful at that. And so everyone that buys a car, he takes a bit of that money and puts it towards a monthly payment on sponsored children. And here just last year when I was talking to him, he had 60 pictures of these children on the wall in the showroom of his shop that he's sponsoring through that money he takes from every little sale and sponsors these children. So it's interesting how these things can come to be if we just allow God to use what He's entrusted to us. Let me ask you this question this morning. Is providing food, clothing, and health care all that's necessary in caring for the poor? I believe God has something more permanent in mind, and that is an eternal solution. In Revelation 7:16-17, Jesus tells of a great multitude of believers worshiping together in robes, cleansed in the blood of the Lamb. It said of them, never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat upon them, nor any scorching heat, for the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. You see, there is coming a day when poverty will finally and fully end. God Himself will wipe away every tear from the eyes of His people, and death, pain, and despair will be no more. God's people will never again hunger or thirst. You see, this is the eternal hope for those now living in poverty around the world. And Compassion works hard each day to meet the physical needs of nearly 2 million children, but most importantly, spreads the hope of eternal life. This is the heart of Jesus, and I trust it's your heart this morning. We're going to take a little break here, and I'm going to ask Luciano to come, and he's going to play a piece on the piano for us, and then we're going to have a little chat together here in a few moments. Well, thank you, Luciano. That was amazing, wasn't it? When I think of Luciano, and I may get a little emotional here because, I mean, we've only been together once before this, I think. But when I look back at my own experiences of being in the field in Dominican and also in Haiti a number of years back, you know, I've seen these little children just running around and basically playing in the sewers and with barely any clothes. And I think of Luciano was there at one time. And somehow through God's grace and love, he was rescued from that. And as I mentioned earlier about the impact and how God takes things and multiplies them. So we have this little boy that really, in regards to the country and the culture, has no hope. And here he is. He spent 17 years in the program. He's at Kingswood University. He's studying to be a youth pastor. The impact that he's already had on his own family and those around him, because compassion does not just deal with that one child. It also affects the family. And health care is extended to the family. So it goes beyond just the one child. And so when I think of that, it does hit me emotionally because it's a live example. It's not just me telling you this is what happens. This is a living example. Luciano is a living example of what can happen when we do sponsor a child and how God can take that and use that in miraculous ways. Luciano, tell us a little about your background and just share with us just what God has done in your life and through those years with compassion.
My name is Luciano. I grew up in Haiti. So I grew up in Léogâne. Léogâne is a small city outside of Port-au-Prince, Port-au-Prince being the capital city of Haiti. And I grew up in the Western Church, and at the age of 3, I got accepted into the program. And it was like kind of another home for me. At this point, me and my family, we used to live like close to the church. And I grew up in a single-parent home, so it's kind of like my mom had to like go away like every single day, and to do her own stuff to take care of me. And then I would spend like my entire day like at school, at the church, and in the program of compassion. So yeah, I spent 17 years into the program, and after that, I attended a Christian school, and then I started working with them in my local church. So that's kind of the big picture of things.
So your experience as a child being with compassion and being at one of the centers, could you just give a little bit of an explanation of that or how that sort of fleshed out in your life as far as that engagement?
Yeah. Growing up, compassion was kind of like my entire world. Like, I grew up in the church, and I got to, like, kind of get involved in all the stuff, all the activities and programs that were there. I got my first music lesson there, and learned like how to use a computer in the program, and it was like compassion really taught me like what generosity really is, because like thinking about someone like my sponsor is from the United States. His name is Chris Miller. I never got to meet him. But like thinking about someone that so far that has never met me in person, that was willing to invest in me, and thinking about all these counselors and teachers that were there for me, like when my mom was away and stuff like that. So I really, like, my sense of calling, like all this stuff came from compassion, and also my spiritual development, because when you're a compassion kid, you have to you have to go to church. You have to participate in all these like churchy, spiritual activities and stuff like that. Or if you don't, you get kicked out of the program. So even like growing up, sometimes I'd be like, oh, this Sunday I'm not going to church. And my mom would be like, no, you're going to church because if you don't go to church, you get kicked out, and I don't want that. So it was, yeah, kind of another family for me. And I met like my mentor that taught me the piano. I met him through the Compassion program. Like my role models, like all these people are like affiliated to Compassion stuff. So.
Yeah, no, that's neat. And I'm thinking of an event that I was at with Compassion in Ontario. This was several years back. And it was the 50th anniversary, actually, of Compassion Canada. And they had a couple there. They were an older couple. And they had sponsored a child for, 17, 18 years, all the way through the program. And they surprised this couple at this event with this lady that came, this girl, young woman now. She came to that event, and they met her for the first time. And I remember seeing that and just feeling the impact of that. And as you said, you've never met your sponsor during those years. And I know from the experience we had of meeting ours, and even for John, we haven't met yet, there is a connection there, though, that even though you don't have a physical one, there's still a wonderful connection to know that, man, whatever that child, even though I can't be there with them, they're getting that kind of influence in their lives. And so, so that's a neat experience. Haiti itself, probably a lot of us have heard about Haiti. It's a fairly devastated country in a lot of ways. Just tell us a little about the culture there, or just what people are feeling, and even what you're thinking as you try to sort out what you're going to do with your life. I know you're going back home here next week to Haiti and work with a global partner missionary, right? Yeah. So maybe just share a little about that, of what the needs are there in Haiti.
Yeah, so people are really frustrated, like in general in Haiti, because it's unsafe. Like you don't feel safe. Like anything can happen. It's kind of in Haiti, people say, oh, it's a really slippery land. So anything can happen. It's unsafe, and in Haiti too, there's education is a problem, and with political corruption as well. And when all these things are combined with poverty, it's kind of a vicious cycle. Poverty, it produces corruption, and corruption in turn produces poverty. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. And yeah, it's education is a big problem. So growing up, I got to have a very good education through the Westland Church and Compassion. And I also got to get involved in my youth group and stuff like that. That's how I got called into youth ministry. And a few years ago, I received a scholarship through the Global Partners Missionaries. So now I'm studying youth ministry at Kingswood University. So my plan is to go back to invest in the youth pastors and young people in Haiti. So, yeah. Yeah.
See, that's just amazing to me that here's someone who's come off the street and they're going back to minister to their own people. That's just amazing. When I was in Haiti a number of years ago, you talked about the corruption, but you talked about the unsafeness that's there. I remember we were back in the interior of Haiti, and we were building a church, and there were 4 teams that went in. One team went in, one come out. And I remember laying in this cot one night and hearing the voodoo drums. And I have to admit, it was kind of disturbing. And here you are, we're 8 or 9 whites in the midst of this country that is predominantly black, of course. And, it was just disconcerting, but in the midst of that, the interesting thing is in the midst of that, and we all felt the same way, that we felt the presence of God, and we didn't feel frightened. We really didn't. I mean, it was a little disturbing, naturally, but we didn't feel frightened. We just felt protected. Mm. But maybe you can speak a little of that, because that's widespread, isn't it? Voodooism, yeah. The evil of that, is that? Yeah. That's a big part of a lot of people's beliefs, right?
Yeah. So, like, in Haiti, the spiritual reality, like the spiritual warfare, like, it's more present and more obvious. Like, people know, like, what, like, this stuff is. Like, people wouldn't be surprised, like, if you approach them and talk about, like, spiritual stuff, because we kind of all experience that. So a part of that is, like, it's spread through both, like, poverty and the need to feel safe, because, like, people, like, they constantly feel in danger, and sometimes they kind of need, like, this higher power to feel protected. And when they are, like in voodoo, like in Haiti, there's no moral code, so it's kind of like, oh, I can get protected and nobody's gonna keep me accountable. So it's kind of like easy for people, like, to get involved in witchcraft and voodoo and stuff like that. Yeah. But, like, the church is still, I feel like the church is still doing great. And through that too, people are more like, sometimes they don't get the answers through this stuff, and then they turn around and turn to Jesus. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, it seemed to me when I was there that the church was having a tremendous impact on the country. And I often thought, I don't know what would ever happen if you took the church out of these countries and the work that they are doing in the midst of that situation that's there. I remember when we arrived, the Wesleyan mission compound in Port-au-Prince, they had, someone had stolen the water pumps out of this pond, so we couldn't stay there. So we had to go to this, it was I guess you could call it a bed and breakfast type place. It was owned by Americans, so the food was all clean, and it was good to eat, and the water was good to drink and all that. And it had I remember being inside a compound with a big gate, razor wire all the way around it, right in the middle of Port-au-Prince, which was just extremely poor area. And I remember that night, about the middle of the night, we heard three gunshots right outside the window, so to speak. And I don't even believe there was no glass in the windows. They were just kind of screened openings. We were on the second floor of this building. And I knew it was fairly unsafe, because when we went to bed at night, they come up and they locked both ends of the hall with this gate. This was up inside the house. Anyway, so we just kind of all, we're all in this one big room, and there were two gunshots, and then there was another one here just in another minute or so. So anyway, the next morning, we go down to breakfast, and we sort of asked the guy, did you hear those gunshots last night? Oh, yeah, they were just welcoming you to Haiti. And basically, the story behind that is, though, that the robbers outside, to be robbers, I guess, they fired 2 shots at the gate to see if there was anyone inside, like a guard. And I remember before the bed, a guard come in, and he had a shotgun and everything, and the 3rd shot was him firing back to say, yeah, I'm here, come on in, boys. So that's kind of the environment and the culture, and that's just a normal thing, right? So, yeah, it's way beyond what we can imagine or understand living in the country that we live in. Before we end this, do you have anything else you want to share to these folks this morning? Anything on your heart?
Yeah. So compassion, really, like, it's not another, like, charity or feeding program. Like, it's a very good program, and I got to like, obviously experience that firsthand. So yeah, they really, like, took care of me, like, spiritually. So if you get to like answer that call, I think it's a privilege and a very good way to fulfill both the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. And I think it's basically what the church was called to do in the first place, to reach out for the lost, the least, and the poor, and the people that don't have like any other people to reach out to them. So if you get to answer that call, so I would like strongly encourage you to answer to it. And you can actually see, like in my community, the difference between the children that are sponsored and the children that are not. Like compassion is really making a difference. So, yeah.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you, Luciano. We'll just end up here and.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. I appreciate Luciano being with us this morning. I know he's trying to finish up his term work. You know, any of you that have been involved in college, you know what that's like when you get down to the end of the semester, that all that's got to be done, and then he's heading back to Haiti on Wednesday. So certainly be thinking about Luciano, if you can, in your prayers, even this week, as he heads home, and that God would use him as he goes back to his own people, give him the opportunities to share his faith, and God would use him in a great way. Well, today I want to invite you to sponsor a child of your own. You knew this was coming, didn't you? And you can sponsor a boy or you can sponsor a girl whose story you can personally change. And you can change that through your love, through your prayers, through your letters that you'll have the opportunity to send to them, and your support financially. And, you know, you may be a grandmother or a grandfather here this morning and say, well, I'm too old for that. You know, I probably may not make it through their whole term. Well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. And when I often think about that, and I'm a grandparent now myself, is that I want to teach my grandchildren that poverty does exist, it's real, and that we can make a difference in that. And so I'm excited about the opportunity of down the road sponsoring a child for them and have them realize that this is a real thing and that we can truly change what's happening today in the world with regard to poverty. Compassion Sponsorship Program gives children safe places to play and laugh, opportunities to get an education, and to see a doctor when they're sick and learn about God's incredible love for them in Jesus Christ. And as Luciano said, that's huge. That's huge. A sponsored child will hear the good news that God so loved the world that he gave his only Son so that whosoever believes in him will have eternal life. You know, it doesn't take a lot to make a difference. You know, for $41 a month, a child can be changed forever. And really, what's that? That's really the cost of a Tim's coffee, isn't it? Each day. And if you're wondering how funds are distributed, and I think this is important to say because there are organizations that don't do this that well. But in the last fiscal year, 85% of funds raised were used for program activities benefiting the children they serve. And that is really huge if you want to look that up yourself with regard to other organizations. That is very high. And so 85% of the money that you give, 85% of that $41 goes directly in caring for that particular child. And as a result, Compassion is now one of the largest and most effective child development ministries in the world. We all know we can't totally change the reality of poverty in the world today, but we can make a difference, one child at a time. So can I challenge you this morning to make that difference? And following the service, Marty and I will be out by the table, and we certainly love to have you stop by. I'll show you a pack here that we have. These are on the table. There's various countries that these children are from. No obligation to look. But we'd love to have you stop by, and if you're interested, please talk to us about that. All I ask is don't take one of these out the door without first getting things done as far as the paperwork goes. So I just ask you to not do that. And just in closing, I just want to give a brief illustration of a story I heard just a while ago. Early one morning, a man was walking along a beach after a fierce storm and encountered thousands of starfish washed up on the shore by the wind and the waves. And upon seeing this, he immediately began picking up these starfish one at a time and threw them back into the sea. Now, another man who happened to be observing this shouted out, "What are you doing?" And the man replies, "I'm saving the starfish." But don't you see, man, there are tens of thousands of them. Nothing you can do will make a difference. Well, the old gentleman did not answer him. He just bent down, he picked up another starfish and cast it back into the water. Then he turned and he smiled at the stranger. He looked him straight in the eye and said, "It made a difference to that one." And that's really what we need to focus on, isn't it? We can't change the whole world. We can't look after all the needs that are there, but we can make a difference, one child at a time. Just going to have a short little video clip here, and thank you for listening, and God bless you.